Welcome to another episode of our podcast, ladies and gentlemen. I am here in Fort Worth, Texas with my friend Dave Schultz from Limitless Brave. He has been a men's coach for a long time. So today's podcast is going to take a little break from politics, and we'll be discussing a little bit of culture, a little bit of dating, a little bit of men and women and the dynamics between the two. Dave, welcome to Fort Worth, Texas. Welcome to Texas, my friend, again. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
All of this wasn't planned. A lot of planning did not go into this. We just connected a couple of weeks ago,
Definitely.
and he is here. And I'm really happy that you're here. I think we're going to have an amazing conversation today, to be honest with you.
I think we will too, and thank you for having me. It's awesome to be back in Texas. I've been to Texas many times, but I haven't been to Fort Worth, so it's great to be here. And we're really excited to be here at the old Gringo store in Fort Worth, Texas at the Stockyards. They're letting us film here in their physical location. This is their first physical location. Even though the business has been around for 24 years. So come down and see these guys. They have incredible Western wear, awesome boots, and anything you might need. So,
yeah, really grateful. All of this, again, wasn't planned. Not a lot of logistics came into this. We just came to ask if we can shoot outside, and they were like, you know what? We are going to open our living room for you guys.
Yes.
And beyond grateful. So old Gringo, my hat off to all of you for working here. Thank you so much for allowing us to do that.
Definitely.
Yeah, so Dave, how did you start being a men's coach? I feel that that's something that we kind of need in today's day and age, something that it wasn't really needed years ago.
Yeah, decades ago.
Like decades ago, it wasn't something that it was needed for men to need guidance. However, we live in a day and age where a lot of men, and I know I was one of those, that grew up without a male role model. And, you know, that changes you, or it makes you grow up with a few deficits. Probably not everybody is going to enjoy the term, but it's the truth, it's the hard reality. If you are a boy that grows up without a father, which a lot of boys in America are,
yes,
that you're missing a few things that a male role model could provide.
Definitely. And I mean, this kind of movement started back in the late 70s, early 80s, actually, where after feminism, we had this huge swing toward feminism, and you know, men were feeling kind of left out. Men were not actually showing up like they had been back in the 50s and the 40s, like being the man of the house. And so, you know, women were getting all this power, which is fantastic, and all the rights that they got out of feminism, which is awesome. And seeing them equal in ability, but not equal, and we'll get to that later. So, you know, we have these big cultural swings in America from one side to another. It's like these culture wars that are always going on, and they're kind of cyclical if you look back through time. But you know, I got into this back in 2009. That's when I kind of started really seeing that I had a talent to help men and coach men. Growing up, I was surrounded by boys. Like all the families that my family interacted with, all boys. There was only one family that had a girl. So I was raised in a culture of men and masculinity, and I like to say hyper masculinity because sometimes it was pretty toxic, honestly.
Yeah.
And we can even talk about toxic masculinity. That's actually a term that's been misused, but we'll get into
absolutely.
We'll get into that later. So that's the kind of environment I was raised in, and all of these families had the mother, the father. So I was constantly being inundated with what a man should be doing, how he should be doing it, how he interacts with a woman, how he interacts with other men, and so that's how I was brought up. And having that structure and constantly having it reinforced allowed me to be fairly successful with my life and understand what a man's roles are and what he should be doing in a traditional sense. So that's where I started as a boy. As I got into college, men started seeking me out from a dating perspective first and foremost, because, as we finish high school and we get into college, what do we want to do as men? We want to date women. And so I was doing that. And guys were like, how are you doing this? And so I would give them little tips and pieces of advice as I went through college. And at that time, I had also run several businesses. I had worked for a motorsport team. I had managed that team as well. And I had a little business experience, and I'd already been traveling a lot at a young age all over the country. And so I had a different perspective on things, and men really liked that. They liked seeing my ideas and how I was doing things, and my willingness to stand up for myself, do what I thought was right, and not be ashamed of that, and not hide it from the world, which when you're kind of doing those things, it really allows you to command some respect as a man. Is really, this is my course, this is what I'm going to do, and take it or leave it. And people respect that ultimately. So moving further down the line, after college, I started working in the automotive industry. I spent almost a decade working in corporate world, and just found out it wasn't for me. The whole time I had continually helped mentor some friends that were in that industry with me. I had a clothing company at the time, and through my clothing company, this other coaching company, they liked some of my shirts, and they happened to be in Washington, D.C., where I grew up. And they said, hey, we'd love to meet you and love to get some shirts, and we can help push your brand out there. I said, sure, I'll give you guys some shirts and I'll come meet you. And they had told me what they were doing, and they were coaching men ultimately in business and dating. And for a long time, they wanted me to come take one of their workshops, and I refused to do it. And finally, the owner was like, look, just come out and see what we're doing. I said, okay. So I went to see what their workshop was all about. I immersed myself in it, and I was like, this thing's terrible.
Oh, wow.
It's horrible. And it was very surface level. There was no depth to it. And they just didn't know what they were doing. They just didn't have the experience that I had already had at such a young age. And I was like, I'm much better suited to coach men than these guys are. So I'm like, if this is the garbage that's going on now, I can actually do a better job. And so I started my own coaching company from that point on, and have been working with men since 2009.
Such a fascinating story. Helping.
And that's the short version of it.
That is the short version.
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. I think I have a spare memory card for the camera to catch that. What is... So since you're doing this, let's just get into it. What are men struggling with today?
Men are struggling with a lot of things. They're struggling with identity. They're struggling with emotional capability. Our soldiers are struggling with PTSD. Mm-hmm. The VA is doing very little to help them. Men are struggling with divorce, either going through it or leading up to it. And men are struggling dealing with their businesses as well. I'm working with a guy currently who has a lot of emotional attachment to his business, but has an opportunity to sell it for a good amount of money. And so it varies a lot, but those are some of the core things that men are struggling with. One of the big things is actually expressing their masculinity and truly being a man. A lot of men are very apologetic due to our culture today. You know, it's looked down on to be a man these days, and that if you do anything manly, it's toxic. Mm-hmm. So they're struggling with that messaging. A lot of men are afraid to even go ask a woman on a date, fearful of
rejection.
Fearful of rejection, but also fearful of legal consequence no thanks to the Me Too movement, right, that happened. And I'll say this about the Me Too movement. It got blown out of proportion, as those types of things normally do. However,
it did feel like it started for good reason.
Yes. When you have perpetrators, like in Hollywood, we know that these people
we
exist.
have evidence.
Yeah, we have evidence. It's all through society in a sense, but guys that are true perpetrators of this need to be strung up at the gallows ultimately. Mm-hmm. They should not be allowed in society. But the extent to which that was taken harmed good men and kept them from going out and doing what men naturally do. And that's, meet women if they don't have one, right? And expressing that masculinity without fear, and it being looked at as a positive thing.
It did feel, especially not being from here, being an immigrant in this country, when I first started learning about the Me Too movement, it did feel that it was going into the direction which is now that we should believe all women, regardless. We shouldn't ask questions. If somebody's saying something, we should automatically believe them, which I find it in itself a very toxic mentality. And it's nothing to do with women. It can be about men as well.
Sure.
No man should be believed automatically, and no woman should be believed automatically. God gave us a brain to use, and I feel that it's our job and our responsibility to use some discernment and to use our reasoning.
Yes.
And when we are getting into the nitty-gritty and looking at details and asking questions, I feel that is part of our job.
I agree. I mean, if we just look at the legal system, right? By definition, we're innocent until proven guilty.
Correct.
But that's not always the case these days. You're guilty until you're proven innocent, ultimately. That's what it comes down to. And so, talking about the legal system against men, we know that this is very prevalent in America. The legal system is not set up for men. And so you have women taking advantage of that in a negative way, and there's nothing men can do about it.
Yep, somebody said just the other day in a conversation regarding marriages and the marriage contract in itself, just the marriage contract, not marriage in general, just the marriage contract in America. Why would any man get into a marriage contract with somebody in a country where there's a more than 60% chance that you're going to be losing in the end? And outside of being faithful and loving your wife and everything, I do agree with you 100% that if it gets to a divorce, she will get your money. If you have kids, most likely 9 out of 10 cases, probably maybe it's 8 out of 10 cases, she will get a child. Yep. You will have to pay child support. And the system is definitely in this country, definitely doesn't feel like it's favoriting men. And at the end of the day, it shouldn't favor men or women. It should be a fair system, right?
Yes.
Because Lady Liberty should be blinded. It's blinded. Every statue in every courtroom, she's blinded. So it shouldn't matter if you're a man or a woman. The case should go on its merits. However, a lot of times it's definitely not. Versus coming from Europe, I feel that there's a better focus and more pressure, even societal pressure in some cases, for men and women to be better partners, to be better wives, to be better husbands, to provide more and to have that family unity and those family values that, we could use a little bit more here in all honesty.
Sure.
And it's something that is being instilled in us as from when we are young.
Yes.
Here, divorce is so common. Yeah. It's so common for everybody to get a divorce here in America versus in Romania. If you say that you're getting divorced, the entire family gets involved.
Sure.
On both sides. Let's see what we can do. Let's try to work it out. Now, I'm not advocating if you're in a toxic marriage to stay in it, especially when it comes to abuse, emotional or physical abuse.
Emotional, verbal, physical, but absolutely not.
I feel like here people give up easier versus in Europe, at least in my country, in Romania, family values matter. Morals matter, family unity matter, and the unity between the wife and the husband are in higher regard at home, in my opinion, than they are here.
I would agree. Plus, the interesting thing about Europe is, especially Romania, because my wife's Romanian.
Yeah.
And
his wife is Romanian,
yes.
by the way.
I've been to Romania many, many times. We were talking yesterday. I probably spent upwards of 2 years in Romania, so I know the culture very well. But there's the cultural shame, right? The shame of the family coming down on you because you're gonna get divorced, because you're not living up to, right? The husband's not living up to expectations, the wife's not living up to expectations.
100%. You're so right. I completely, I wanted to mention it and I didn't. They definitely, your family will be the first ones to hold you to higher standards when it comes to your marriage. Now, I'm not saying that, like, I'm a very big proponent that when you're in a relationship or even in a marriage, your problems are your own. Yes. You're not to discuss those issues with your friends, your family. Like, it's your responsibility as a wife or as a husband to work those things within the covenant of your marriage. But there are signs, right?
Yes.
And I feel that in our culture, you're being held up to that standard of being the best husband that you can be, to be the wife that you can be. And I don't get here. I mean, here you guys are kicking your kids out when they turn 18. Go explore the world.
That was something that was a little bit of a culture shock to me as I've traveled around the world. In America, because we're such an individualized nation, right? We're all individuals. That the kids leaving the house at 18 or earlier is just such a common thing. Now, I know in Romania, a lot of the kids leave the house to go to high school, right? Especially if you're going to like a good high school and you don't live close to it. Like my wife, Anna, she left home at 14, right? And was living on her own, going to school. We don't necessarily have that kind of culture here in America. So as I was saying about my wife leaving home early and going to school and things like that. And as I traveled around the world, I noticed, to your point, that, like a lot of kids stay with the family much longer outside of the U.S. than here. And I just think, it's very interesting, but that also, it seems to hold the family bond together a lot more than it does here in the U.S. Now, there are, families here in the U.S. that are very traditional, have a lot of traditions, a lot of family traditions. And those families are really tight-knit, and I really appreciate that. And when I'm around families like that, I love their traditions. I love how close they are. And it's very similar to what I see outside of the U.S. But for the most part, America is extremely individualized, and we are very prideful about that.
I think it's, as an outsider's perspective, I think it's a good thing with limitations. So when it comes to individualism, for me it's very important when it comes to rights. Because the European mentality is, you guys have XYZ rights because it's good for everybody as a group. Versus here, you have individualistic rights, which I hold them in higher regard. I think that they are doing better, like freedom of speech, freedom to assembly, freedom of religion, Second Amendment, and so on and so forth. Basically, the U.S. Constitution, the GOAT of documents ever written, in my personal opinion.
I would agree with you, and our forefathers put a lot of thought into developing the Constitution and all its amendments based on what the states wanted at the time, and then also what they had seen from the King of England and what was going on in Europe, and the things they disliked and why they left and why they came here and created this fantastic country is really, really cool when you dig into that, and you can see why they developed things the way they did.
I totally agree with you on that, and it definitely, this is the great experiment, right? America is the great experiment.
Totally.
And without trying to get too political, we made the promise that we weren't going to get too political here today. I I don't see the experiment succeeding in the direction that we are going into. And
Current day?
yeah, and as an immigrant here, somebody that came here for what America stands for what America is, it really, really bothers me. And I feel that it's all part of culture.
It is.
Which I think it ties in a lot with the work that you are doing. Coaching men and guiding men, and I think it's all a result of culture. I mean, the number of fatherless families that we have in this country is unparalleled per capita, so we can compare it with any other country out there, right? The amount of single parent households, again, per capita, blows out of the water every other country out there probably.
And definitely.
I think the culture is definitely playing a role into it, and it's influencing, how to say this, some aspects of the day-to-day life. Like we talked earlier, there's an expectation that the child moves out at 18 versus where I come from is more popular, to stay with your parents. So even if you have a job, you can save a little bit to set you better for the world, for your career, financially and so on and so forth. Here, I feel like a lot of times ego is getting the best of us, myself included.
Sure.
Because of societal norms, societal expectations, and so on and so forth. And it comes...
One thing, I just want to interrupt you. When I look at what you were talking about the children staying with the family more, when I look at the economy, the economic aspect of it, right? Mm-hmm. The economies aren't as great outside of the U.S. And so therefore, from the perspective of saving money, like you're saying, the income that someone makes outside of America typically is less versus what they're actually paying for products, goods, and services. A lot of things are much more expensive outside of the U.S. Mm-hmm. The U.S. is very cheap, especially like electronics, right? Very cheap. Yes,
an iPhone in Europe is significantly more expensive than an iPhone here in America.
It very much is. And a lot of people don't know that. But these are the little details that people outside of America are dealing with, which is why I think economically, why kids are staying with their parents a lot more. And that's starting to happen here in America as well because of the insane amount of inflation.
Correct. From your perspective, let's change gears a little bit on this, because we talked about culture briefly. I mentioned culture earlier. How do you see, from the perspective of the work that you're doing, coaching men, mm-hmm. in 2024, how do you see culture tying in with the dating scene and men in this day and age?
Okay, so based on what we just discussed, you said something that's really interesting. We have fatherless homes. And, well, if there's a fatherless home, who's raising that boy? It's mom, it's grandmother, it's sisters. He's lucky if he has another brother around. He's lucky if he has any kind of masculine role model at all, which is leading to current day issues with men, which are no examples of what masculinity should be traditionally, no deep understanding of emotional intelligence. And one thing that, when I was kind of researching some of the old school guys that had started some of these men's movements back in like the late 70s and early 70s, late 70s, they were always talking about this deep masculine that was so prevalent in what they were discussing was a man's ability to share his emotions amongst men without judgment, but ultimately bonding together with that closeness of emotional vulnerability. We do not have that, or it's very rare in men these days, to connect on a deep emotional level and share what's ailing them, what's going on in their life, and having that really nice connection. A lot of men are trying to get back to that, and I do a lot of coaching around that, and you just don't see it. And so men are not bonding together like they used to back in the day.
It does feel like it's being frowned upon in this culture today for men to show emotion.
Yes.
Which, again, brings my mind just went to toxic masculinity right now,
Well,
to
sure.
be honest with you, because I feel that a man that shows emotion is not weak. However, a man that doesn't know how to handle his emotions and his feelings, that's when the trouble starts.
Yes.
And I feel that we need to do a better job incentivizing men, especially young men, to be okay in their feelings and to take a second, to take a step back. How am I feeling? Why am I feeling like this? Where do I feel this? How does this makes me feel? How did I get here? To actually sit in those emotions, to sit in those feelings, but also to put in the work to figure out how to handle those emotions. So he can become more aware of the emotional triggers in order to better control his emotions. And I think that's what makes a strong man and the masculine man at the end of the day is being comfortable in your emotions and not allowing your emotions to dictate your actions. And I feel that if guys can find a way to read their emotions and to recognize their triggers and to find a way to handle those emotions so those emotions don't handle you.
Exactly.
I feel that is the key to success, because otherwise you end up with toxic masculinity. If you are a man, well, you're not a man in this conversation. If you don't know how to handle your emotions and you're making daily decisions or life decisions, or you react based on your emotions, that's when toxic masculinity comes. But like you said probably half an hour ago, it is a term that has been taken out of context and just thrown out there in society, just like with everything else, basically.
Yes, absolutely. And so men have a lot of trouble with emotional intelligence because they've never been trained how to identify what they're actually feeling. And when we were talking on the ride over here, you did a lot of deep self-awareness work and learned about this stuff.
Not easy, guys.
Yeah, it's not easy. And guys, we are actually designed to be able to handle this as men. A lot of people think that emotions are only for women, and that's not true. It's really not. It's for us as well.
But at the same time, don't go home and be a crybaby.
Yeah, exactly. Right? We don't want to use our emotions in a needy way to get attention with a victim mindset, right? Or in a manipulative way, right? At the end of the day, us as guys, we're never going to have the capacity to handle our emotions like a woman does. That's her domain, right? We just don't have that capacity, and that's okay. But one thing I'll just kind of point out here for guys listening, there's an emotional scale, and it goes from the deepest, heaviest emotions, or the darkest, heaviest emotions, to the lightest, right? So we have apathy, grief, and fear. Those emotions are very heavy when we feel them. They're very inward directed. And then we have lust, anger, and pride. Those are more aggressive emotions, and they're outward generated. Mm-hmm. So when somebody's lusting, they're prideful, they're out doing stuff, right? And then we have above that, these are our lightest emotions as men. We have our courage, our acceptance, and just ultimately peace, like that Zen type peace, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of men really enjoy that, ultimately that Zen type of peace. That's really what we love as men. So like when you're out riding horses, right? When I'm out doing my sports, the last thing I'm thinking about is anything. I'm just enjoying the moment, right?
Exactly.
And I think a lot of men really like that, and they do that through sport, through hunting, through fishing, right? And all the things that we do as men. And ultimately, that's really what we're looking for. But we have to understand that whole scale there. And then there's subscales actually off of those 9 main emotions, right, that I just mentioned. And once we understand that, and now we have power over the way we feel, and we can identify it and be like, oh, I'm feeling this, right? And guys, if you don't understand anything other than those 9 things I just said, that scale, and you can talk with your woman on just using that scale,
Yeah.
she's going to love it, right?
Healthy communication. It's another thing
Yes.
that I don't want to say that people can't do it here, but I will say that it feels like where I come from, we are very blunt. Let me put it this way, right? In Romania, we are very blunt. We are very direct. If I have something to tell you, I will tell you. It's nothing personal. It's just what I have to tell you. And from there, we are going to hash it out. Like a family, if we are family, like friends, if we are friends, you know, like in a relationship, if we are dating or whatever the case it is. Here, on the other hand, a lot of times it's a lot of walking on eggshells.
Yeah, Americans can't handle directness.
And it's troubling, but also it also helped me become a better communicator. You know what? At the end of the day, if I'm gonna be, you know, completely honest, I will say that it helped me become a better communicator. My communication skills definitely grew up exponentially because I had to challenge myself on what I say and how I say it. And not only that, but also model my interactions and model my tone, my behavior, my body language based on the individual. I mean, I'm running a team of, I think, 60 people at work right now. So the way I approach somebody is totally different than the way I approach somebody else. But when it comes to the dating scene, I would say that the biggest struggle has been finding a partner that is emotionally mature and can communicate and not just, you know, have superficial conversations or just shut down. And that has been the case for quite some time now, is finding the, you know, that connection and that balance with the right communication skills.
Yep.
But also I think that men could do a better job at communicating as well in our society by far.
Yeah, we aren't great communicators, right?
No.
Because typically we don't have that emotional awareness of that scale that I talked about to communicate with our other guy friends and our girlfriends and our wives, right? It's really difficult because we don't know what it is. We have no idea what we're actually feeling. But having that scale that I just talked about allows you to just start some basic stuff. And those basics are actually really the fundamentals that really allow us to communicate. And like, you know, if somebody wants to go deeper, sure, you can do the work and go deeper, but...
Oh, I'm a sucker for deep conversations.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun, especially, you know, if that person can go there with you, right?
Yeah.
Because you have the conversation, but you have the emotional components behind it, right?
Yeah.
And so if we can do that with each other, just on a fundamental level, it's really nice, and it's a rare thing to happen, right? Especially like with guys, like when guys really connect to each other, not just from being guys, but like on an emotional level, they're like, yeah, that guy's cool. He let me into his life and shared something that was personal with him. And guys, like if vulnerability seems like a weak word for you, just think of it as like something personal, something deep and personal and close to you. Like if you can share that, that's actually vulnerability. But you know, I know some guys have trouble with that term vulnerability, right? They think that it means
it makes them weak.
They're weak, and that's absolutely not true. That is what makes them such a solid, well-rounded man, and people buy into that. We get sucked into that when we look at, you know, our male leads in our music, right? All of our bands and our singers, and we look at, like, say, singer-songwriters, right? They have a deep emotional ability to actually share that with us in the audience, and that's why we're so invested in what they're doing, is because it's actually an emotional transference that's going on there. They're on stage being emotionally vulnerable in front of thousands of people, and that's why people love them, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not weakness, guys. It's really not. It is. It helps make you a really solid, deep, masculine man, and that's something that we're missing in our culture.
Yeah, learn how to control your emotions. It's gonna help you So much. Imagine, like, personal relationships, dating, marriage, professional relationships.
Yes.
Imagine your boss being a little hard on you and you can't control that emotion.
Yeah.
So the sooner in life that you are controlling your emotions, you learn how to control your emotions, the better. That's why a lot of times when single mothers are raising boys, that component is missing. So as somebody raised by a single mother, teach your boy how to control his emotions. It's gonna boost his life and his status in this world 1,000-fold. If he knows how to manage emotions, how to control them, recognize them, and be a man, stand your ground.
Yep.
That's how I feel. That's how I feel like that. What is happening?
I would agree with that. The thing that I would add is that, boys that are raised by women, by mothers, by grandmothers, right? They're always in a feminine environment, right? So they are learning about emotions their entire life. Mm-hmm. For a guy, that can be bad because they start acting actually like women. And so there's this weird disconnect amongst men. You're like, what's going on with this guy? He's overly emotional, like you're saying, right?
Been there.
And
no, I'm very open.
Yeah, I mean, it's
how I was, the work that I did to be where I am today.
And I applaud you for that, because it's not easy work, right? Yeah. Especially when you don't have a masculine role model to be like, look, okay, my job isn't to react to these emotions like the woman is. My job is to ground those emotions, create space for her to go through those emotions, and she will naturally settle herself down, right? Yeah. Think about it when
the emotional wall for her emotions to bounce on.
Yes.
Basically, at the end
like
of the day.
I say container. That's
container.
what I say.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah,
that's what I say. Container.
The man coach, obviously.
Right? And for our woman to feel safe with us, our container always needs to be just a little bit bigger than hers, mm-hmm. so that she has a sense of safety and comfort, and she knows where those boundaries and those walls are with you as a man. Now, she is always going to push you to go deeper. And my wife, Romanian.
We are recording.
Yes.
Be careful. Camera is rolling.
She pushes me very, very hard, right? On the emotional level, right? But that's her job. There's an old saying that a man's job is to protect his woman, mm-hmm. so that she can walk the earth unharmed. And her job as his woman is to lead him to his soul. Yeah. And so that's what our women are always doing, is they want us to get in touch with ourselves more. They see the depth in us that we can't always see as guys, because that's not our domain, right? That's their domain, to see that emotional depth. And they want to lead us there so that we become ultimately better men. That's their job. And again, our job is to provide that trust, that safety, that container, so that she can be fully feminine for us. A lot of guys get this wrong. They're like, I want a feminine woman. They're like, well, you have to be a masculine guy first, because you got to remember that container, it needs to be a little bit bigger than hers, so that she feels safe to actually be feminine for you. And when she does, you feel even more like a man. So it's this reciprocating process, right? As guys, we're the leaders of all of these interactions. We're the leaders of our relationships. And as long as we're leading in the right direction, providing that space for her, she is going to continue to be more and more feminine for us, and allow us to feel that feminine energy that enters us as men that we love so much from a woman, and it makes us feel more masculine. And then that just keeps going over and over and over again.
You made a video the other day where you used the terms, and I'm paraphrasing here, okay? The dating landscape has changed compared to decades ago. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
So guys, men, let's talk about men, shouldn't use the same mindset that it was used 20, 30, 40 years ago when it comes to dating, because times have changed, culture has changed.
Yes.
Right? The dynamics are totally different. We have social media, we have internet, we have cell phones.
Yeah.
You know, we have it all.
Yeah.
So the same principles that applied decades ago don't apply anymore. And you commented on this.
I did, yeah. I was talking about using an old playbook.
Exactly, that's what you said.
Yeah. I wasn't necessarily talking about dating at that point, but I was just talking about men up-leveling themselves and getting to that new life that they daydream about all day at their mediocre job that they actually hate, right? That's kind of what I was talking about, but you brought in a good perspective about the dating aspect, right? You know, back in the day, we didn't have the technology that we have. We have so much access to so many people these days. It's mind-boggling. But, you know, 50 years ago, that wasn't the case. We had our villages, we had our little towns, our little cities, right? Even within big cities, access to people was limited.
Yeah, I had to be home for you to get in touch with me,
right?
Call me.
Yeah, to call, right? Or even before that, we're writing letters to people,
exactly.
Right? Yeah. And so we've just sped up this process through technology, which has ultimately changed our culture, right? Back in the day, you know, if we saw a girl in town, you know, we could go ask her out. She would say yes or no, and we would go on a date, and things would be pretty rudimentary compared to what it is today. And typically, if things worked out, you know, you'd start your family and so on. And today, when we don't like someone, we've got 1,000 other options.
Correct.
Which also leads to divorce issues here in the US and around the world. I think it will start happening around the world more.
It started to rise. I looked at it, I don't know the numbers, but I did look at it probably a month ago. Somebody challenged me on it on a live stream, and I pulled it up. And historically, even in Europe, it has been steadily increasing and increasing and increasing.
Mm-hmm. And then we also have this like weird dissociation from reality with our tech these days, especially like dating apps, right?
Correct, yeah. It's so easy.
We can almost have a connection to someone, and that's good enough for some guys. And it's not a real connection.
Yes.
But they will obsess over that little bit of connection, and like that's not healthy at all.
A podcaster that I follow, Sabrina Zohar, shout out to her, Do the Work podcast on social media. She's saying texts have no tone. And building a connection in your mind over text, it doesn't mean anything. They can text you all day. That is not reflective of their interest in you. Because a lot of people are feeling lonely.
Yeah.
They are alone, and they are going to give attention, and you know, or they are insecure, and they are going to accept attention from anybody, and they're going to engage in that back and forth texting, messaging, you know, calling and whatnot. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they have an interest in you.
No, that's very true, and it's interesting that she said that, and I am curious as to like kind of why she said that. But you know, women have an ability to read a subcontext in a text message. Mm-hmm. Men do not, until you understand the dynamics of that. Like I can read through a text thread, mm-hmm. and I can read all the underlying emotions and what's actually being said subsurface.
Yep.
A lot of guys cannot do that, and I actually can teach guys to do that as well. But you can express emotion through text messaging. It's not easy, but it can be done. And that leads to a lot of confusion for men because they don't understand those subtleties, right? And so when a girl is texting a guy and he is getting that validation hit, right, that he's looking for from her, it doesn't matter what she's saying, he's reading it as is. But she might be sub-communicating something underneath of that. And that's what you have to be aware of. And that's why so many guys get led astray, taken advantage of, because they allow themselves to get wrapped up in someone who's truly not interested in them.
Yeah, very well said.
Yeah.
Again, a big shout out to Old Gringo, Stockyards, Fort Worth, Texas, for allowing us to record here, for opening their doors to us to shoot this morning, this podcast inside their store. They are a company that have been in business for 24 years, and this is their first physical store. So this is the OG of stores. It's definitely a touristic attraction here at the Stockyards in Fort Worth, where people come to enjoy the Western life, and they welcomed us in. So, Old Gringo, thank you so much for having us here.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Awesome to be here. And guys, if you've never been to Fort Worth, Texas, and you love the Western lifestyle, this is the place to be, especially here in the Stockyards. There's so much history here. It's incredible. It's my first time being here at the Stockyards, but I've been through Texas a lot. But this place it's fantastic, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely, glad that you're here, and it's definitely a unique city.
It is
compared to no other. Guys, we are at Old Gringo Boots at the Stockyards in Fort Worth, Texas. They were kind enough to allow us to record this podcast here at their first ever store. They have been in business for 24 years. They have part of the businesses in Mexico and part of the businesses here in the United States. And they were kind enough to open their store to allow us to record here. Back at it, let's just get into it. Since you coach a lot of men in day-to-day life, in business, in relationships, in dating, and so on and so forth, talk to me a little bit about accountability from a cultural perspective, but especially with men.
Okay, well, accountability is on the decline, and no one wants to be accountable for anything these days. And it starts first and foremost with the family, but it's also further perpetuated through our educational system, right? Family is not cohesive like it used to be, right? So many kids are growing up these days with single mother, single father. They don't have both of those male and female dynamics helping them grow into well-rounded men, well-rounded women. And when you don't kind of have an authority in your home via your parents. Now, one parent could be an authority, but typically it's really nice to have both men and women being the authority for a child growing up. It just gives them a broader range of responsibility in a sense. And when you have, in a sense, a broken home, it's really hard to implement accountability and responsibility if you don't have both parents. It can be done, and there are some great examples of it actually being done, but it's rare. It's more rare than it is not. And so you have this family dynamic that's not instilling responsibility. It's not instilling accountability. And then they're going to schools, our educational system, which is more focused on passing standardized tests than it is about critical thinking, creativity, and that further shows these young children and these young kids that, hey, it's more important to focus on me and I don't care about anything else because this single test is the most important thing, right? More of that individualism and not caring about the group as a whole. And I see outside of the US, the dynamic of kids going to school, younger kids, they're more aware of the community around them and they care more about the community around them. So, with the individualization in America, with the fatherless or motherless homes in America, in our educational system, it's men specifically are not taking responsibility for themselves, for their health, for their mental well-beingness, for the community around them, and causing the issues that we're seeing today.
Yeah, totally agree with you, and it definitely feels like accountability is going down the drain. We are not holding kids accountable, especially you brought up the education system. I mean, look what's happening on college campuses. They are allowed to do whatever they want, and the entitlement it's oozing. You can feel it through the camera, you can feel it through the social media, where they feel that they are entitled to take over a college campus. They are entitled to restrict Jews from going to class, Jewish students, Jewish professors. They have this sense of entitlement, in layman's terms, because they weren't spanked enough as a child. They weren't educated. And they feel that they have the right to do everything that they want. And again, they are running on emotion, because we mentioned the emotional aspect. And they are making emotional decisions while, again, not understanding anything. They just feel in a particular way and they lash out or react based on their emotions. And then you see, I mean, look at the pro-Palestinian encampments on college campuses. I find it completely unacceptable how that is being allowed, where you have Jewish students that are not being allowed to go to school. You have Jewish professors that are not being allowed to go to class, and it's all in the name of First Amendment. I don't remember reading the Constitution and reading anywhere where the First Amendment is allowing you to restrict somebody's free movement in public. That is not free speech. That is not the First Amendment. That is violence. And I strongly believe that if you touch somebody in a public setting, any unwelcomed physical touch is assault, right?
Sure.
We talked about the Me Too movement earlier, right? So the same applies here. If you have a Jewish student and you're forming a human shield around him, to the point where you make physical contact and you restrict him from going to class, that is assault. And every self-defense law in the book should apply in that situation. That is completely unacceptable. And quite honestly, I blame it on the education system, because they are the ones that are allowing this to happen. You can go anywhere else in any other country. The students don't run the university. The university tells the students what they are going to be taught at, how much they are going to pay if they don't have a scholarship, and what is required of them. Is not the other way around. And somehow you have this, 18, 19, 20-year-olds something with no life experience, no historical education, because everything that we see, especially with the pro-Palestinian movement, it shows a complete and utter lack of history being taught in our schools. Because anybody that would be taught actual true history, they would look at what's happening and be like, yeah, we are acting like the sympathizers of the guy with the funny mustache in 2024, and somehow we ended up here, and it's totally acceptable in this country. And this wouldn't fly in Germany, if you think about it, at the end of the day.
No, probably some places in Berlin it might.
Probably in some places in Berlin, but it really wouldn't.
But yeah, I mean, I just look at it from, like even a business perspective, right? I'm spending all this money to go get one of the best educations in the world, and I can't go to class because somebody is having an emotionally bad day and freaking out and threatening me. I mean, I've seen the videos of students getting attacked. I mean, that's a college campus should be a safe place. It's not, we had, during civil rights back in the day, like we had all these college campuses kind of doing the same thing, the Vietnam War.
Correct, but then actually you had a reason to stand up for something greater than you, versus today you don't. I just saw a video the other day about a lady that just graduated, and her hands were zip tied. She was wearing one of those scarves from the Middle East.
Kaifa?
Yeah, exactly. And she tore up her diploma. So she spent probably $150,000 on a higher education, only to be graduating, to get her diploma, and to rip it up in front of everybody at the graduation ceremony. And I blame this on the right. I really blame this on conservatives and Republicans, to be honest with you, because we have seen college campuses become indoctrination centers that turn your child into a political activist, and everybody on the right was like, whatever. And we are here. We are where we are today because the right were too silent and they have a backbone to stand up for what's right.
I would agree with you about the radicalization on college campuses. It's always kind of been there. From my perspective, going way back into the 60s and 70s, you would see it. Just even when I was in college, there were things that I was like, that makes no sense. I think it's really common on a lot of college campuses for kids to talk about communism and socialism, right? And especially as things get worse here in America and things are getting so expensive and people can't afford basic needs, right? Yeah. Like, I understand why that dialogue's going on, but I think that's part of like the college experience that a lot of kids go through. But the ones that have a strong mindset are like, okay, like I can see through this. This is garbage, right? Mm-hmm. And then we have those who are actually radicalized, right, through some form of injustice, right? That's the first step of any kind of radicalization ladder. And so these students get, emotional, right? And somebody feeds them some type of injustice. And the next thing you know, they're hanging around more people that are of the same belief, and then we get this craziness that we're seeing right now.
Correct. Agreed 100% with you.
So, it'll be interesting to see where it ends up.
It is an election year. It's 2024, right? We have an election year. It feels like it's a remake of 2020, only this time on college campuses.
Sure.
Because,
I thought it was interesting that you don't see much like campaigning from either side these days.
Correct. Yeah, there hasn't been a lot of campaigning.
Usually,
one guy can't even get out of bed without help, right? And the other guy is too tied up in the court system, in the American courts. Yeah. So,
it'll be very interesting.
It's going to be a very interesting election this year.
It will be. Yeah, definitely. So, the accountability aspect, right? Mm-hmm. Like those students, as much as they feel that they have the right to do that, which by free speech they do, but you also have the right to assemble peacefully. Mm-hmm. Right? That's not peaceful when you're attacking students, right?
Correct.
And when you're violating...
What are you talking about? The riots from 2020 were mostly peaceful. Buildings burning in the background, but hey, it was mostly peaceful. There was just an old store, probably somebody's entire life savings into that gas station or store. But hey, we are fighting injustices while creating injustices. Welcome to the reasoning of America in 2020, 2024. It's been a fun period.
Yeah, it's very crazy. When I look back through American history, I just see it as this cyclical thing, quite honestly. And it will happen again 10 years from now, right?
Probably.
With some other new injustice. But when you just go back through American history, it's like 10, 20 years, like this new cyclical thing, this new injustice happens, and we have what we have, like current day. And the beautiful thing about America is that we will always kind of eventually even out, and people will kind of be happy on both sides. There's always going to be people that are not, but for the most part, the majority it'll even out.
You think so?
Yeah. Just when I look back through history.
Okay. We didn't have social media back then.
This is true, and social media is another component that causes a lot of strife in the lives of people all around the world.
A bad idea these days spreads faster and grows faster because of social media compared to 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. So,
and with American culture being so absorbed with the television, right, so to speak, it's like we have our own little television that's designed to feed us through an algorithm, an AI, exactly what it thinks that we're about. And that works very well for some people. And that's how you can get like this radicalization, this indoctrination that's happening, positively and negatively, right? I like to look at the negative side of things as radicalization, and I like to look at the positive side of fanaticalization, like being a fan of something positive, right? And so it's very true. You know, social media plays a huge role in today's political and personal and experience in both positive and negative, right?
Yeah. But we are doing this for social media. We're doing it for the good reasons.
Yes. The fanaticalization. Yeah, definitely.
So throughout your career coaching men, how have traditional gender roles influenced men in today's culture?
In today's culture, regarding that, I mean, anytime we have, you know, a woman being the woman of the house, a man doing the man's job around the house, it's really teaching, you know, both men and women, but men specifically, it's teaching them leadership, it's teaching them responsibility, it's teaching them emotional vulnerability, and it's teaching them about community, about that the family itself is worth more than you as an individual. And that goes a little bit more into that accountability that we're talking about, that decline of accountability, right? So when we have these traditional gender roles, we get to see, you know, how mom and dad interact, and how, you know, a healthy relationship, if it is a healthy relationship, how that actually works. And it helps the guys when they move through life, how to navigate work with a female colleague, with a male colleague, right? Mm-hmm. And when we get into other community involvements, how to manage more than one person. Like how do I respectfully talk to this person? How do I, if I don't agree with their beliefs, how do I still respect them, right? And you know, it helps that man see that he can be a part of community, he can help community, and be an active role in that, right? Through whatever's going on in his community, he can show up, he can lend a hand, he can help out. It also helps men when it comes to the response of an emergency. This is interesting too. You know, if you have a little brother or a little sister and you're kind of the older, you know, and dad's not around, you as a man kind of fill dad's role when he's not around. You can help someone that's injured, right? Young men are learning from dad how he should interact with the woman, with society in general, and that level of respect if he's a well-rounded man. And yeah, I mean, that's...
Do you feel that we are distancing ourselves a little bit from that?
Unfortunately, yes. For example, when we were talking yesterday, like my wife and I, we were out at a restaurant, and one of our favorite restaurants, and one of our favorite waitresses, she actually fell right behind my chair. And it was pretty loud in there, and so I didn't hear her fall, but she was, and I see my wife turn around and look, she's, oh my God. And she rushes to help her as I'm trying to figure out what's going on, and I see I'm getting up to help her as well, but my wife had already got her up off the floor. And we turned back around and sat down once we made sure she was okay. Not a single man in that restaurant who had a clear vantage point of exactly what was going on even remotely made a gesture to get out of their chair to help this woman up off the floor. And
Unbelievable.
My wife was furious. She was like, why am I doing this when there's all... I said, babe, I understand. Like, she's like, obviously you couldn't do anything because it was right behind you and you didn't see it. But from her vantage point, the way she was sitting, she saw it. But not a single guy. And she scanned the room really quick. She's very, very on point. Saw not a single guy in there get up to even help. And that,
Unbelievable.
That kind of decline is very sad. And I see that a lot, where guys are like, oh, I don't want to get involved, right? And
but you're not getting involved, you're helping somebody get up
exactly
from falling, especially a young woman. I can't imagine being a guy and like you look at it and go, whatever, she's gonna pick herself up.
Yeah, it was crazy. I couldn't believe it. So yeah, my wife was furious the rest of the dinner time because of this, and rightfully so.
I'm surprised she didn't say something like,
I'm surprised.
Romania.
Yeah, she is
would have.
Yeah, I'm surprised she didn't say anything. But what was I going to say? I was going to say something else about this. We have the Good Samaritan law in America for a reason, right? It's to protect you if you're helping someone, right? If something goes wrong, that person can't come after you, can't sue you because you're there to help and lend aid. And I don't see a lot of men doing that these days, which is really, really sad. Anytime that I'm around to help somebody, I want to help them. I want to make sure that they're well taken care of, right? Because as a guy, when I don't have all the answers and I don't have all the solutions and somebody can lend me a hand, I can gladly take that.
And it's our job as men to help those that need help. Like in a strong society, in a healthy society, a man will always step up to the plate. A man will always reach out and help those that need help, and regardless of the outcome, regardless of consequences, a man will always do the right thing in the face of adversity.
Absolutely. Like we are willing to die for our own. And that is something incredible, right? That we have that ability and that instinct in us to be like, I will put myself in harm's way. I will take a bullet for you.
For my loved ones.
For my loved ones,
Absolutely,
for my family,
100%.
for my community, for my country, right? Like, that is fantastic. And is it a little dark? Yeah, it is. But, there's a lightness about men and there's a darkness about men. In the darkness about men, a lot of men reject that. But that's where that deep masculine comes in, that understanding of who we are, why we're here, what we're supposed to do. And a lot of men are unplugged from that. And so that innate intuition to do something is not there anymore. Which is really, really sad.
It definitely sounds, and I mentioned this yesterday when I picked you up from the airport. We have a saying in Romania, we call it the pussification of the American man. Basically, they are pushing this ideology that is making men weak, when we should be pushing men to be stronger, and all in the name of toxic masculinity or feminism or Me Too or whatever else is out there, because something in this country, everybody likes to invent new words and new terminology, where we are creating men that are just weak, and when something bad happens, even something minor like a waitress falling, not one single person to step up and actually help.
Yeah. I mean, when something's gone really bad, nobody's looking for a feminist to come help out.
Correct. Absolutely.
They're looking for what today's society is calling toxic masculinity. They're looking for the guy to protect his family and die for it. They're looking for the guy to run into the burning building to save lives. They're looking for the guy that has to deal with the gruesomeness of a car accident and they're extracting that person because they're dead, right? We need men to want to go to war. And this is part of that provider protector role that we have and that we should be sharing with the world. And some men do, right? And it's really good to be around men like that. And I was talking to some clients the other day. I said, it's really hard for me to find solid guys to hang out with. And I have to turn to my friends in special operations because those guys, they get it. They get what it's like to sacrifice. They get what it's like to be a man, but they also get the emotional component. And it's really funny, like you think of a bunch of like burly special operations dudes sitting around couldn't have an emotional conversation and speak with any kind of emotional intelligence. And it is absolutely not true. I've had some very deep and interesting discussions with those guys, and some of their training involves that mindset because of the work that they do. So when I look at that, I'm not saying all guys, but a lot of those guys have just this deep emotional ability, plus the physical ability, and the intelligence to encompass like really what it is to be a solid guy.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you, and I feel like we need more of that in today's day and age.
Yes, yeah, we absolutely do. We need the guy that is going to stand up with emotional awareness, right?
Yeah.
I like to say the bad boy with a heart.
Yes, exactly. Yes. The bad boy with a heart.
Yeah, because that is a deadly combination on all fronts.
Yep, it totally is.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Dave, thank you so much for coming to the stockyards and coming to Texas. And thank you again to All Gringo for allowing us to shoot this podcast. It's definitely been amazing. But yeah, see you guys on the next one.
Yep. Thanks for watching, guys. Thank you, Old Gringo, for allowing us to use your store. It's fantastic. It's beautiful. If you ever find yourself in Fort Worth, guys, here in the stockyards, please come by and say hi to them. You'll be able to recognize their store. They have this awesome cowboy boot outside that's like a neon sign, and you can see it from one end of the street to the other. So stop in and see these guys for all your Western wear. It's fantastic.
It's a wrap.